Ever catch yourself yawning through those morning meetings, reaching for another cup of coffee after a night of tossing and turning? You're not alone. We're diving into some groundbreaking research today. Might make you rethink that afternoon pick-me-up. We're looking at a recent human study, always exciting, with a real mouthful of a title. Repeated caffeine intake suppresses cerebral gray matter responses to chronic sleep restriction in an A1 adenosine receptor-dependent manner, a double-blind randomized controlled study with paid MRI.
Yeah, they needed a bigger title.
Right. Deep breaths will break it all down.
Hmm.
They even use some really cool brain imaging to see what's happening up there.
And what they found was actually pretty surprising. We've known for a long time that sleep deprivation isn't great for our brains, but this study starts to connect the dots between sleep, caffeine, and actual changes in brain structure,
Hold on, brain structure, like physically change.
Exactly. This study focused on something called gray matter. Think of it like processing power. It's where all the thinking, decision-making, memory storage, all that happens.
Okay, so more gray matter is good.
Generally speaking, yeah. And what's fascinating is this study found that when you're mildly sleep deprived, they looked at 5 days of restricted sleep, about 5 hours a night.
Not ideal.
No, not ideal. But your brain actually tries to compensate, increasing gray matter in certain areas.
So it's like our brains are saying, hey, not enough sleep, got to step up my game, keep things running smoothly.
That's a great way to put it. Seems like a sign of the brain's ability to adapt, maintain function, even when we're not giving it enough rest.
So maybe a little sleep deprivation isn't the end of the world. My brain's got this.
Well, not so fast. There's a plot twist. They also found that when people in the study drank caffeine,
We're talking like a pot of coffee a day.
no, moderate amount, what you'd find in a few cups of coffee, it seemed to block this increase in gray matter.
Wait, so my brain's trying to adapt, and the caffeine's like, everything's fine, no need.
It appears so. And not only did caffeine seem to suppress this adaptive response, but in some brain areas, particularly the prefrontal cortex.
And that's
Oh, only the CEO of your brain. Planning, decision-making, attention, all the important stuff.
right, of course.
So caffeine actually seemed to decrease gray matter in some areas, including that one, after those periods of restricted sleep.
That's kind of terrifying. I use caffeine to get through my day when I haven't slept well, but is it working against me long term?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it gets even more interesting when we bring in the brain's adenosine system.
Okay, let's unpack this adenosine thing for those of us who didn't take Neuroscience 101.
Essentially, adenosine is a neurotransmitter that builds up in your brain throughout the day. Longer you're awake, the more adenosine, like a sleep pressure gauge.
And caffeine messes with that.
Yes, caffeine blocks adenosine receptors in the brain. Those receptors are like little gauges for sleep pressure, right?
Right.
Caffeine's like tampering with the gauge, making your brain think it's not as tired as it is.
So if adenosine is saying, time for bed, caffeine is saying, nope, we're good, let's party.
Exactly. And here's the kicker for our caffeine-loving, sleep-deprived listeners. This study suggests that people with lower levels of a specific adenosine receptor, the A1 receptor, in their brains showed a larger decrease in gray matter after sleep deprivation when they consumed caffeine.
Hold on. So some people might be more vulnerable to these gray matter reductions because of their individual brain chemistry.
That's what the research suggests. Our responses to sleep deprivation and caffeine can vary a lot based on our own biology.
So what does this all mean for the average person who relies on caffeine to power through those sleep-deprived days? We've covered a lot: sleep deprivation, gray matter, adenosine, even the mighty prefrontal cortex.
It's like we're finally getting this user manual for our brains, but we haven't quite figured out how to read it yet.
You're reading my mind. So how do we apply all this? Like, I'm listening and I'm thinking, okay, I love my coffee, and yeah, those late nights happen. What's the takeaway?
Well, first things first, no need to ditch your morning coffee just yet. This is one study. It's not about demonizing caffeine. It's more like a wake-up call to be more mindful, of our sleep habits, our caffeine consumption.
So not quitting caffeine, but smarter about it.
Exactly. This research really shows how important sleep is. It's not just about feeling rested, it's giving your brain downtime to literally repair, recharge. When we're constantly sleep deprived, our brains are playing catch up. And caffeine might be masking some of that, at least in the short term.
And we don't know those long-term consequences of that masking. What's really got me thinking is our brains might be physically changing. We've been focusing on gray matter. What about the other parts?
That's a critical point. This study is a snapshot, one piece of a much larger puzzle. We need more research to really understand the long-term implications for other things, like white matter,
White matter, that's...
the brain's communication network, connecting different regions so they can work together.
So imagine those lines getting crossed from the sleep deprivation and caffeine. What happens to thinking clearly, making decisions, even remembering where you put your keys?
Exactly. And remember how this study focused on specific brain regions, like the prefrontal cortex. The brain's like an orchestra, different areas for different functions, all working together. If one section is out of tune, the whole symphony is affected.
And this study only looked at people for a short period.
Hmm.
Imagine years of this, decades even, chronic sleep deprivation, plus the daily caffeine.
That's where the big questions about long-term brain health come in, cognitive function too. We're just scratching the surface of this. It's incredibly complex.
And we can't forget about the thalamus. That was a big one.
Absolutely. That's like the brain's air traffic control for sleep and wakefulness. And this study found it was particularly vulnerable to both sleep deprivation and caffeine. What's even more concerning, it showed a slower recovery even after a full night of sleep and no more caffeine.
So even when we're doing the right things, good night's sleep, laying off the caffeine, our brains might still be feeling the effects of past sleep deprivation.
That's what this research suggests, yeah. It really highlights how interconnected these systems are, you know? What we do today can have a lasting impact.
It's like we're finally figuring out the instructions, but we haven't been reading the manual. This idea of our brains actually changing. It's a lot. Any good news here? Any hope?
Definitely. One encouraging thing was a lot of those gray matter changes, except in the thalamus, they reversed after a good night's sleep. And no caffeine.
Okay, so our brains are tougher than we think. Give me more.
This points to brain plasticity. Means our brains are really adaptable, capable of change, even as adults. This study suggests we've got more power than we realize to, impact our brain health with the choices we make.
So it's not a lost cause, even if we haven't had the best sleep habits.
Exactly. Enough sleep, being mindful of caffeine. These aren't just about feeling good right now. They're investments in the long term for our brains.
This has been eye-opening. I'll admit, I've used caffeine to get through those tired days. This makes me think about the trade-offs, long-term.
It's about finding that balance, right? The study didn't answer everything. It actually brought up more questions.
Always the way with science,
Right. But it showed that our brains are always adapting. And understanding that is the first step to making choices that support us, our health, our well-being, long term.
We've covered so much: gray matter, the thalamus, even adenosine, like a whole new language. But what I'm taking away is knowledge is power.
Absolutely. As we learn more about this, sleep, caffeine, brain health, we can make better decisions. How we live, work, even how we have our coffee.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Remember, you've got more control over your brain health than you might think. Until next time, keep those questions coming and keep exploring the world with curiosity and a healthy dose of skepticism, especially when it comes to what you put in your body and how you treat that amazing brain of yours.